The question though may be now, how do you even go about measuring networks? Well, there are essentially two different types of methods, two different types of ways of performing this sort of measurement. The one is what we call a direct measurement or an active measurement. The other is that of an indirect or a passive measurement. When we talk about direct measurement, what we're referring to essentially is when you're actively performing a test. When you're actively performing a test in order to investigate and to explore what is happening on the network. Now, this type of measurement can happen in two different ways. It can either happen inside a country locally. In this case, it would happen by volunteers or by users who would connect to a network. And while they're connected to a network, they would run the test themselves. In this case, the benefit is that you're able to gain data which shows you exactly what is happening on the local network as the user would experience it. So you're able from inside the network to see what is happening. And often this can lead to more accurate data. However, when you are engaging someone on the ground to run these sorts of tests, it is very important that you acquire their informed consent, because sometimes network measurements can potentially be risky, depending on the threat model of the user, depending on the legal and political environment of the country, and many other factors. So as long as the volunteer or the user is informed of what type of test they're running and what they are testing, and have received all other relevant information that is necessary to acquire their consent, they can participate in this type of measurement and run tests on the ground directly to examine what is happening on the network that they're connected to. Another way to perform direct measurements, to actively run tests, is from outside of a country, where this can involve remote scanning. Here, the advantage is that because you don't rely on people on the ground to run tests, there's potentially less risk involved. But and another benefit as well is that you can potentially test many more websites and many more services than what you can potentially test on the ground as a user. But because you are not performing the measurements from inside the network, there is the risk that the data may be a little bit less accurate. So there are different benefits and different trade-offs depending on the approach that you choose. Both are complementary and both are essential. So that is a bit about direct measurement, where you're actively performing tests connected to a network on the internet. Another form of measurement is what we call an indirect measurement. In this case, you're not really actively performing tests. Rather, in this case more involves the collection and analysis of telemetry. An example of this is, say, Google. Google provides many different services, and because they provide these services and because they use various analytics, they're able to track how many users they have and how many users are connecting to their services from many different countries. When users stop using their services, for whatever reason that may be, in those cases, we can see that they suddenly stop receiving traffic from that specific country. This type of information can be useful, as they can potentially infer an internet outage. Quite similarly, other organizations like Firefox and IOTA, who you will learn about in one of the next modules, use telemetry in order to infer when internet outages occur from the lack of relevant measurements or through the analysis of relevant telemetry. In some cases, projects may utilize a combination of both direct and indirect measurements, which is, for example, the case of IOTA, who we will learn about later. Another thing that is worth highlighting here is that, as you can understand, as this sort of testing happens on networks, on the internet, that means that we're examining information controls that happen on the network level. So social media censorship, for example, like Facebook potentially censoring specific content, removing content, taking down content based on government requests. These forms of information controls are out of scope for this particular training, since it's completely different research. It's basically social media companies censor information in their own walled gardens and in their own platforms. Whereas as part of this training, what we're examining is how information controls happen on the internet, on the network level, and how access to specific services or the internet as a whole is disrupted.